Have you ever wanted to change? Maybe you've asked yourself, how do I change, or how do I change myself? So today I'm going to share with you two models. One of them is a psychological model and the other one's an NLP model. And both of these models are going to help you let go of bad habits and pick up good habits. In other words, they're going to work on the level of behavior and allow you to change your behavior. So here's the cool thing though. These models go far beyond behavior because behavior alone is not enough to change. And we've all felt and experienced that, where at some point in our lives, we've come across behaviors we no longer wanted to do, bad habits. And we've tried to force ourselves not to do them. And maybe it worked for a little bit. Maybe it worked for a long bit, but it's just so difficult. And then at the end, we end up resorting back to our original state. So without further ado, let's jump in. Today's a real treat because I'm going to share two models with you that I really, really like. And they do a great job of informing each other. So one of them is a psychological model, and that's called the COMB behavioral model. It's a model that describes how people behave in the world and how they can change their behavior in the world. The other model I really like is the logical levels of change. Now, this is an NLP model. The thing that you'll notice between both of these models is that there's a lot of overlap. And this is where they can inform each other and pick up where the other one is a little bit fuzzy. So you've probably heard people say that if you want to change, just do it. If you smoke, just stop smoking. What this ignores is the fundamental reason of how people behave, because behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. Behavior always happens in an environment, in a setting, in a context. And this context is both social and it is also physical. And so that's one of the components, is that behavior happens somewhere. The other thing is that in order for the behavior to happen, there has to be opportunity. What this means is that there has to be opportunity on both ends of the spectrum, an opportunity to behave a certain way or an opportunity not to behave a certain way. And so opportunity is key here, especially when we're looking at behavioral change. And then there's capabilities. Now, you might want to get on a healthy diet, but if you don't know how or what a healthy diet is, then it's going to be really hard to do it. And so you have to be able to do it. The other part of capability is that do you have the resources to actually go out and do it? And so now let's look at what each of these capabilities, opportunity, and motivation, let's untangle them a little bit and see what's inside. And here we can start to see the relationship, because all three of these things influence each other. So capability can directly influence behavior. Capability and opportunity impact each other. Opportunity and motivation impact each other. This is a dynamic model. Now, capability, there's two sides of that coin, and that first is physical and then is psychological capability. So physical capability, this entails that you have the skill and the abilities to physically do it. If I was going to do a deadlift to 400 pounds, I don't have that ability, and it's a physical ability that I lack. Now, the thing about physical abilities, they're generally learned. So you can learn to practice the physical ability, and one day I might be able to do backflips. And this is where the part of the motivation and the beliefs come in. And we'll cover that in a little bit. Next is psychological. So do you have the knowledge, the know-how? Obviously, any sort of skill, any sort of competence is going to be heavily psychological and heavily mental. So now let's look at and break down opportunity. So opportunity really comes down into two areas. One is the social opportunity, and the other is the physical opportunity. And the social opportunity means things like social pressure, expectations, social norms, conformity. And if you don't think that social context is a big deal, just next time you go into an elevator, instead of facing towards the elevator door, just face the other way and look at everybody. And you could sense the awkwardness in the air. And this is how, on a very small level example, norms are unwritten rules that in this case, the elevator have no negative bearing, might even have a positive bearing if you're looking the other way, yet they feel uncomfortable. And this feeling of uncomfortability plays a really deep impact in terms of how we're motivated and plays into our motivational systems, as we will see in a second. And then, of course, we have to look at the situation and the context and the resources. So you might want to deadlift 400 pounds, and maybe you have the ability and the know-how, and maybe you've done it before, and you're highly motivated, but if you're not in a gym and there isn't weights around, you're just not going to be able to do it. So you need to have the right access to their environment and the right resources. Last but not least, let's look at motivation. So motivation breaks down into two parts. So the first part of motivation is reflective motivation. Now, this relates to our beliefs, whether we can or cannot do something. It relates to our values, whether what we were aiming to do is worthwhile and worth doing. Henceforth, we would be motivated if we have both of these components. We both value the thing and we believe that we're capable of doing it. Also, this relates to our identity, the roles we play in our lives, and our intentions and goals. So for example, we might value something, we might believe we can do it, but maybe the timing's off and it's not part of our goals right now and it's a low priority. Maybe some other role is taking precedence. Probably the most interesting one is the automatic. And that is that we automatically behave the vast majority of the time. When you're in the world and someone says something and the first thing that comes to mind, that first reaction, that is your automatic conditioned response. Most of our behavior, in some sense, unconscious. We might not even realize that we're doing it, the exact words that we're saying, and so on. And it's because it's just coming out automatically. And this is when people talk about getting triggered. This is what being triggered is. It's like just the right words are coming, someone pushes a button in the person, and then the other words come out. And this could be a good trigger that makes someone feel amazing. It could be a trigger that doesn't make someone feel amazing. And the way that works is through our emotions. It also works to our norms and punishment. So back to the example in the elevator. Again, this is a neutral example. You're going into an elevator. You don't know, these are strangers. You'll never see them again in your life. Yet there's this negative feeling that makes it difficult for us not to conform. And there might be this looming sense of punishment or reward. And punishment can literally be as subtle as people giving you a bad look. So in order for behavior to really happen, we need these prerequisites. We need the capability, we need the opportunity, and we need to be motivated. And then once we have all three of these things, then bam, the behavior can happen. Now, let's look at behavioral change. When you're looking to change your behavior, whether it's to change your habits or to change something that goes beyond just your habits, maybe you want to change your life, what is necessary goes far beyond just changing your behavior. Changing your behavior, as we could see, alone is not enough. Now let's talk about how to change. And this is where the logical levels of change are profound. There's 7 levels to the logical levels of change. And this is really a pyramid. And we could say that the environment is at the very bottom. And we could see how this relates to the other model. They overlap and they inform each other in a very great way. So the environment's at the bottom, which means that if you're trying to change your environment, well, what do? You change your environment, you behave, you do something, and then that's how you influence the level below. And so if you want to change your behavior, what you do is you have to work on your capabilities and your values. And if you work on your values and your capabilities, then you can change your behavior. In other words, you can't just change your behavior on the level of behavior. And this is how this model works. If you want to change your capabilities, you have to look at your values and beliefs and find the motivation, the reason for upgrading or updating your capabilities. There has to be a motivation for you to do it, a reason why. If you want to change your values and beliefs, you have to consider who is the one that's going to change that. Okay? And so it comes back to your identity. So your identity sits on top of your values and beliefs. And then finally, we have the vision and a higher purpose for who or for what beyond yourself. But not just beyond yourself, but including yourself, do you do this for? So now let's go into what each of these levels are about and what they mean and how we could work with them. So your environment is more than just the physical or social environment. It also includes your overall life situation. What this means is we're looking at your relationship, your finances, your health, and your inner life. How do you spend time alone and with yourself? How do you talk to yourself? What type of words do you use? How do you feel? Now, the social environment includes your friends, your family, your work environment, alone time. What you also want to consider here is what is your ideal environment. Your ideal environment is going to be really conducive for accomplishing your goals and your mission in life. So consider what is the ideal environment for you. You've heard the story that you could run away from your problems, but your problems would just follow you. And this is how the relationship is dynamic. And that is that these higher levels, in some sense, within this hierarchy, they produce the lower. but the lower also influences the higher. So it's a two-way street. Your environment is going to, in some sense, especially as you're a young person, is going to inform your behavior. It's going to inform it's going to give you feedback on your capabilities through the people in that environment. It's also going to impact your values and beliefs and your identity and so on. And this is what it means to get socialized into a culture, is that your social culture and your environment is informing all these things within you. But later on, as you become more mature and self-determined, you start to be able to have more responsibility to direct your own behavior. And then what happens is you become more and more conscious, more and more aware of these different things. You become more aware of your behavior. Then you become more aware of your capabilities. And then you become more aware of your values and beliefs and so on. And so now let's look at the level of behavior. So here we have actions. This is like, what are you doing and how does it feel when you're doing it? What kind of habits do you have? Do you have bad habits? Is there a resistance or a flow in your everyday as you're moving through it? And then what are your ideal habits? What are like 2 or 3 habits you ought to have, that you want to have? And what are 1 or 2 things that you want to let go of? Next, let's move to capabilities. Now, capabilities are just related to your talents and your abilities, your knowledge, education, your self-awareness, and your competence. And the self-awareness is a really big one, because sometimes we think that people that are really, really well educated or really smart are also going to be great critical thinkers or great in terms of interpersonal or interpersonal awareness, and that's not always the case. As we shall see in a second, their values and beliefs play a big role. They're actually the thing that resides on top of capabilities. So that's why it's so common to have people that are extremely well educated, and in some cases they believe things that are harmful. So when we come and look at talent, skills, knowledge, education, self-awareness, and competence, there's an interesting paradox here. And the paradox is that on one level, you might be great at some of these things, and you might not be aware of it. If something is a natural talent or skill that just comes to you, you might discount it and dismiss it and not be fully conscious of how difficult that said thing is for other people. Now, as you grow and mature, you become more and more aware. And this is a bigger insight into how this model works. And that is that on these lower levels, like our environment, we're super conscious of our environment. We know this is a table and a microphone and so on. And then once we go into our behavior, we're aware of our behavior. But even with our behavior, we start to become and have areas of blindness, things that we don't know we're doing that other people could point out to us. But generally, we know what we're doing. When it comes to our capabilities and our talents and abilities, we generally know what they are, but we have even more fuzziness on this level than we do on the behavioral level. And then when it comes to our values and beliefs, our awareness, generally speaking, our consciousness, it goes down even more. It becomes even fuzzier. It becomes very ambiguous. Now we're going for things that are very tangible to things that are very ambiguous. So now let's look at the level of values and beliefs. And there's a very interesting relationship between values and beliefs. They're 2 very different things, but they're related and connected in this model because they both answer the question of why you would do something. They both answer the question of motivation. And so an easy way to think about this is that anytime you're moving forward in the world towards something, what you're doing is you're moving towards something of value. And in this sense, a value is almost like a tool that you can use or utilize in your life in some sort of tangible way ultimately. So for example, you go to work, and let's imagine that you love your job and that you're doing valuable work that's meaningful to you and so on, and that it pays you well. You're literally changing the world in some small way for the better, and you're being rewarded for it with actual money in your bank account. And so it becomes a very, very tangible thing, that thing of value that you're both creating for yourself and for others. And so that is the right way to think about values. Values should be things that are actually valuable in the world and that we're moving towards, whether that would be a relationship, a career, it could be any set number of values, but generally they're going to all revolve around the 4, 5, 6 areas of your life. And so another thing about values is they typically come down to one word: security, wealth, peacefulness, success, influence, and so on. Now, there's an interesting relationship between the values and beliefs. The values are actually nested within your beliefs and within your model of reality. Now, each of us has a model of reality, a certain set of beliefs about what we believe the world to be, what the world to be about, what the world is made of, and how it works. And according to this model informs us on what is actually valuable and worth pursuing in the world. And so generally, our values are going to sprout out of our belief system and our beliefs about the world. Beliefs identify the things of value, and they either empower you to pursue them or they limit you from pursuing them. So if you believe that being an entrepreneur, for example, is worthwhile and it's really valuable, but at the same time, you don't believe that you have the capability or that you're good enough or whatever it is to pursue that goal, then you won't. And here, the beliefs act as that extra bit of the motivation. Without believing that you can actually get the thing of value, you won't go for it. And so in order to become motivated, you need these two ingredients. You need to both value the thing that you're going after, it needs to be worthwhile, and you have to believe that you can attain it. Next, we're going to look at identity. And identity is your self-concept. This is everything that you think and believe about yourself. These are all your thoughts and your feelings that you have that are a part and that you identify with. Now, these core beliefs that you have are going to also be related to your roles in life. For example, you might be a father or a mother, a son or a daughter. You might have a certain profession like a lawyer or a business person, and so on. And then you might have certain beliefs. You might be into American exceptionalism or Chinese exceptionalism. You might believe that your country is the greatest country and be a real patriot, as an example. You might identify with your relationship or approach or your attitude towards life. For example, if you're a competitive, win at all costs, hardworking, hard-driven, this sort of attitude might be a defining quality that you identify with. And so here I put together an example of someone's identity. This person's a lawyer. They went to Harvard Law School. They're a rationalist and materialistic, deterministic in terms of their worldview and what they believe to be true about reality. And hence, this gets projected back on them. We could see how there could be some friction within this person. For example, someone that is competitive and wants to win, and he's hardworking and he's always right. And let's say he also has a family. These values might come into conflict with his values at home and how he treats his family members. For example, he might be a workaholic and not spend a lot of time with them. And the time he does spend with them, he might be really driven to instill hardcore values in them, which might backfire where it costs a good relationship. Some of our identities are really well suited for one set of environments, and in another environment, it's not as good. Ultimately, if you're looking at this, you will notice that all these things come and go. The lawyer here wasn't always a lawyer. So is he a different person now that he's become a lawyer? Rationalism, materialism, and deterministic way of thinking and believing about the world, these are things that he picked up and learned in culture in his life. And so before he learned those things, was he a different person? Now, there's something that is consistent with him before, during, and after. In the future, he might drop many of these things. He might no longer be a lawyer. He might not be a rationalist and materialist. Will then he be a different person? And so you can see that over lifetime, we change a lot. And through all that change, there's got to be something bigger that connects all these different changing selves and is aware of all these different changing selves. And by definition, since it's aware of all these changing selves, it cannot be one of them. It has to be something that transcends them. And here we come into the next part, which is the vision and the purpose. This is the part that extends beyond you. And it's obvious that this is the case because, well, we don't live in the middle of the desert all by ourselves. You don't find humans just randomly, in nature in one-off situations. We're social creatures. We live in social environments. That's one way that we're very deeply connected with our world. But it goes far deeper than that. And so first we could start at the lowest level, and that's like the atomic. So obviously we're also made up of atoms and cells and organs, which make up our organism. And all these things are nested within each other and are part of holistic systems all the way up. We experience these different levels when we get sick. For example, you might experience things happening on a cellular level. If you have radiation poisoning, you're experiencing things on an atomic level. So you could say that we experience the atomic world is through something like radiation poisoning. Now we go up a level from that, and that's our physical body. Now we're at the body of organism. Well, even as a body and organism, we're not a separate entity by any means. We still need food and water and air. In this sense, we're no different than a fetus that is getting food, water, and air from her mother. We're inside the world in the same exact way. Now, this is a paradox of sorts, because in the same way that we're inside the world, right, the world is also inside us. And it's inside us because it literally, everything that we experience in our own consciousness. And ultimately what we're experiencing is our own mind and our own consciousness, our own relationship with the world. That's what we're really experiencing. And if you think about it, you actually spend more time in your mind thinking, imagining, and so on, than you do in your body. Sometimes you might even forget about your body. You might forget about your posture, your breathing, but you're always thinking about something, mostly feeling something. This mental, emotional world is ongoing, and this is where you really live the majority of your life. And it goes far beyond us, because the language that we think in obviously is not our own language. It was something we learned. And so every word that we think was given to us. The sentences and the concepts and the ideas that we think are also something that we learn from our environment. So we learned the sounds, we learned the words, we learned the concepts and ideas, all from our environment. And in this way, our culture informed us on what is valuable, what the belief systems are of the day, and what is worthwhile going after. And then when we reflect in our quiet moments and go into our imagination, more or less all of us strive for similar sort of things in our imagination. We face similar sort of challenges in our imagination. In our imagination, many of us come up with similar solutions. In any moment, multiple people might be thinking the same exact types of thoughts right now. So you could even ask, are these thoughts my own? If someone else or hundreds of other people are thinking them right now, it's a good question. In this way, our minds go way beyond us, and they're interconnected with other minds. They're interconnected in our imagination, in our language, in our culture. And when we communicate, we're literally sharing thoughts with each other. When I say these and share these thoughts with you, you take them on for a second, hopefully without judgment, try them on and see what that's like. And so in brief moments of time, all of us think similar things. Now, these thoughts don't exist inside of a vacuum. They naturally produce feelings, and they can trigger our imagination. They could even lead us to action. And this is a little preview of the level of the mind. Now, when we go beyond that, we go into the level of the world. Right now, for example, we're in a world where everything is ordered. Electricity is running. It's not too hot or too cold. You're not overwhelmingly hungry or tired or anything like that. And that's because there's a network of systems invisible to us most of the time that are working and sustaining life as it is at this very moment. And then finally, there's the universal. We're made out of stardust, and that even on a physical level, some part of you will exist on forever. So when we think about our mission or our purpose, it too should go beyond ourselves, because for one, we're already existing in a world that is beyond. And so the real way to move forward is to consider both the self and that which lies beyond the self. This is where our ideals come into play. We want to consider, what is our ideal life? What is our ideal self? Who do we want to become? Who do we want to be? What is that best, most idealized version of ourselves that we would like to experience, that's worth experiencing in the short amount of time you have left on planet Earth? And what type of lifestyle do you want to live? One of the best ways to think about that is to consider, what do I love? Because that love, in some real sense, the love literally extends beyond you. It goes beyond just the self. It also gives you a sort of equality with whatever it is that is being loved. Next, we want to look at how to actualize this. And the way to actualize this is to align it. And the alignment works like this. You start from the top and you go to the bottom. And so you want to ask the questions of, what is your ultimate vision and your ultimate purpose for your life? What is the thing that is most important to you, and then for the bigger humanity, okay, the world, etc., and how you can create multiple win-win situations where it's both good for you and good for the whole. And I think one of the best ways to actualize this is to consider ikigai. Ikigai is a system where it asks 4 questions and you try to find an answer that answers all 4. And you start with, what do I love? Then what are you good at? What does the world need? And what can you get paid for? And this strikes a good balance between the big self and the small self. And so once you have clarity on what your ideal vision is and what your purpose is in your life, then what you do is you bring it down to the level of identity and you align your identity with that vision. Now, when you align your identity with that vision, you're going to take on the characteristics and become the person that you need to become in order to actualize that vision or that mission. With our example here with this guy that is a lawyer, and right, like him being competitive, driven, hardworking, right? That's the right type of attitude, more or less, to become a great lawyer. Being a rationalist, being always right, going to Harvard, again, it fits in with being a lawyer. And so if you wanted to become a great lawyer, you need to consider who and what type of person would become a great lawyer naturally because of who they are. Who is that person that becomes a great lawyer? And what are their characteristics? What are their beliefs? What are their values? What are their attitudes? What is their identity like? And so you really want to identify the core aspects of that person's identity, what they think, what they feel, and what they believe about themselves in their core identity. And so we go from vision and purpose to an identity that is aligned with this vision and purpose. And then you need to consider your beliefs and your values. Now, there's going to be some values that are going to be very conducive to this new vision and mission, this higher purpose. And there's going to be some that are not. And so you're going to have to identify the beliefs that are empowering you and utilize those beliefs. And then you also have to work through the beliefs that are limiting you. A great exercise here would be the fear setting exercise. And then you're going to have to consider what it is that you don't know that you must learn. And those are going to be talents, skills. And that part is an easy part. Once you align these higher up levels, you can start doing this capabilities level. And there's an interesting interplay here, because as you're working through limiting beliefs and you start working through them through both capabilities and behavior, like we said, the upper levels align the lower levels, but the lower levels also inform the upper levels. And so in the beginning, you might have a limiting belief about your capabilities of, let's say, a certain behavior. Maybe you're having doubts about doing social media marketing and you don't believe it'll work, or that you're right for it, for example, or that you have the right capabilities. But now, once you start doing it, right, you go through a fear setting exercise. You get the right environment and equipment, so that part's check marked. You watch a few how-to videos. So then you start working in your imagination. You start imagining yourself doing it. And you do this because if you have a hard time doing it in your imagination, it's going to be way harder to do it in real life. You want to get to a point where it's easy and effortless in your imagination, and then this act of imagination produces the natural inclination to and desire to do it. And so now you're practicing it in your imagination, and then you start doing it little by little bit. And now you're actually doing the behavior. And as you're doing the behavior, you're starting to update and inform your beliefs that, yes, you can do it. By acting and by behaving, we can increase our own self-confidence in what we're doing. And in this way, we start building momentum forward. And that is how you align yourself. The last but not least piece is looking at the type of change you want to affect. You can use this as a map. For example, if you are having a hard time doing something, you have to look at these 3 levels above: your capabilities, your values, your identity. If you're looking for a bigger life mission to transcend or go past procrastination or nihilism or something like this, then you actually have to look at vision and identity and what your beliefs are about the world. And so I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.